In Chapter 14, we'll discuss using instructional media. So the objectives for this chapter are to describe the key points for utilizing and/or creating instructional media, explain the difference between asynchronous and synchronous education, evaluate instructional media for intended audiences, measure literacy and numeracy level of educational materials, and identify key technology trends in media. So one of the things the chapter starts off with is a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so when it comes to knowledge and retention, right, we know that pictures, right, say a lot, whereas when it comes to trying to memorize what someone said or just looking at words on a page, it can be much more difficult to retain that information. So looking at the benefits of visual media, so again, people will remember more. And so it is also, though, it has some added benefits of being helpful to groups with limited reading ability. So again, this is why you'll even see, for example, at restaurants, they'll actually have picture menus. Because again, it's very simple. I can still look at the picture, I can order the food I want. If there's literacy or numeracy issues, so again, trying to comprehend stuff, again, making it very simple. And again, language challenges where pictures, right, with the exception of some cultural competency issues, right, pictures should transcend any language barriers. So looking at what learners remember during presentations, so 7 to 10% of text, 20 to 38% of verbal information, but 55 to 80% of visual information. Now that being said, right, is that pictures can't give you everything and all of the details, so you can't just have a slideshow just be 20 pictures and call it a day, but chosen correctly, right, visuals will strongly support your messages and your presentations. So when planning the use of visual media, the first thing is we need to decide the objectives or aims of the session, which is what you'll be planning for your presentation is, at the end of this, what do we want people to know, be able to do, be able to identify, and so we'll discuss Bloom's taxonomy more. You'll also want to be able to know and identify what methods or activities will help facilitate accomplishing your objectives. So for example, if at the end of the lecture, people should be able to check their blood sugar, then we're going to plan it very differently than if they're going to be able to explain what blood sugar is. So one is knowledge and one is actually doing something. You have to look at the target audience. So again, looking at literacy, numeracy, health literacy, cultural competency. So who is this for? At what level? Is this for the elderly? Is this for the young? Is this for the college-aged? And what is the learner's current level of knowledge of the topic? Again, the presentation that you would give in graduate school is very different than the ones you would give at the community health center, which has to target the entire community. What purposes do the visuals serve? So again, this is why we said you can't just have a presentation of 20 pictures and go memorize everything. Well, I might be able to memorize the images, but I don't know the context, what they mean, etc. So is it trying to reinforce specific knowledge, a skill? Is it how material flows? So how can you organize and sequence points to be made? Again, what's that logical flow? So again, if I'm going to talk about how to check your blood sugar, then the first step is, what is blood sugar? Why is it important? How can we check it? And then how do you actually do the steps individually? And then how will you evaluate the effectiveness of the presentation? And this is your famous pre and post test. You know, you can do interactive things like looking at clickers or having people participate in a quiz afterwards, etc. All right, so looking at our art and design principles. So the first one's going to be simplicity and unity. So when you're trying to convey ideas throughout your presentation, right, you want to convey one idea at a time, and 3 main messages are sufficient. So again, think about it like you're writing your classic 5-paragraph essay. An intro, 3 body or 3 messages, and a conclusion where you wrap it all up. The second principle is going to be wording and lettering. So you want to use the fewest amount of words possible. You want to use an image, again, a relevant image that doesn't detract from the presentation. You're going to decide on the size and kind of lettering. So again, I now know it's very common these days to use a sans serif format or without the little tick marks on the ends of the letters and numbers. But again, making sure you're using appropriate size. Again, knowing your audience. So if they might have vision issues like the elderly, you want to use a larger font. Limiting it to 1 or 2 fonts. Again, every single slide shouldn't be a different font. There should be some consistency between the presentation. and using capital and lowercase letters appropriately. So again, for titles, you may want to use all caps, but again, reading that inside content can be very distracting and more difficult to read. For handouts, at least 12-point font. With the elderly, again, we said you might want to use a more appropriate size, somewhere between 14 to 18-point fonts. When in doubt, use dark colors on light backgrounds. This is why you'll notice, for example, this blue and this black on a white background is very easy to see. Again, words should be limited to 20 to 36 per slide. And there is the rule of 6. And so the rule of 6 states no more than 6 lines with 6 words each, which is how you get to the magical 36 words per slide. Looking at color, so again, you want to focus on the visual, select the color for that element first. Now again, this is culturally dependent, but cool colors, so greens, blues, and violets are typically pleasing. You'll notice that, for example, this has blue. But again, you can use other colors, just be aware of the topic that you're using. And again, deciding on background colors. Remember, if you're using a dark background, you're going to have to make sure that you're using contrasting text, or you're going to have text boxes that make it easier to actually read the information. Looking at images, again, we said these can help illustrate difficult concepts. So again, some things, it's just easier if I show you, right? So then you want to choose a relevant image. But again, consider the layout and its effect on understanding and its purpose. So again, do you want to explain something and then show it? Do you want to show it and then explain what's going on in the picture? So on and so forth. Now you also have to decide on balance. And so the book discusses that there is formal and informal balance. So formal balance, it's a mirror image of the other half. So again, if you were to fold it in half, it lines up perfectly. So again, I can create 2 columns with 3 points each, right? I can do this with text. I can do this with images that are equal size, right? I have formal balance. Informal balance is asymmetrical, and it's more interesting and attention-getting. But again, you have to take into account how the information will be viewed. So from left to right and top to bottom. So again, whatever you want the audience to view first, plan accordingly. Again, you want to make sure that you're using multiple formats. In the case of your presentation, you will be doing a PowerPoint presentation and a handout. So again, that's the classic, so a printed copies of any digital presentations. That's why you provide people with copies of your slides. But again, there's other formats that you can combine. But again, you want to try and use multiple formats, but also be prepared if you needed to deliver your presentation without the assistance of media. So again, you still have to have proper speaking skills. If you did not have your PowerPoint projector functioning, but you did bring copies of your slides, right, could you still give your presentation at a reasonable level and still have your audience learn the material? Looking at copyright and permissions, so you want to make sure that you obtain permissions for images or recordings. So especially, for example, if it's patients, which is a huge no-no without a whole bunch of paperwork if you're creating something for the hospital. If it's other people you know, right, you need to sign in a release that just says that the images can be used. If you're obtaining something online, so for example, web-based images, they could be public domain, they could be copyright, and it's on you to find out. So you can't just go, well, I found it here and I assumed. That does not fly as a legal argument, so you need to determine and then choose appropriately. So you can find some images are royalty free, some have to be paid for their use. Sometimes it's free for educational use, but if it's for professional use and you intend to make a profit off it, it's not, and so on and so forth. Now, we also are going to talk about the different types of learning that you can be doing with your presentation materials. So the first is synchronous learning. And so this is where everyone is learning at the same time. And this is things like one-on-one or small or large groups. This is things though like video conferencing and webinar. So synchronous learning is what most of your other instructors have been doing, which is when you're on the Zoom call, they're actually doing the teaching in that moment. In contrast, we have asynchronous learning, or out of time or anytime learning. So this is reading journal articles, watching podcasts, participating in email discussions, or the type of teaching that I do where this lecture or presentation is recorded, you review it and read the chapter at your leisure, and then we have a discussion. So again, participating in an email discussion or participating in a Zoom session. So that is asynchronous learning, and this gives more freedom though to the learner over their approach to learning. So you can choose how many times you want to view the presentation. Do you want to read the chapter before or after the presentation? What exercises you want to do, right? You have more control over how you pursue your learning. Again, you just have the different tools at your disposal. And so with asynchronous and synchronous learning, we now have seen a change in the way we can actually educate our workforce. For example, we have computer-based learning modules. So this is very common, for example, at the worksite when you go and do your orientation, where they have you go and you sit and watch the video, you have to click through things. What in this room is dangerous, or what in this room is the potential fire hazard? And you click on this and you click on that. So you have to participate, so you're still being involved and engaged with the learning, but it's just a pre-recorded module. These can also be very beneficial for learning facts. So again, similar to if you wanted to do training for ServeSafe, there is a digital version. It is more money, but there's a digital version. You can do this with other types of training for computer-based training. So if you want to teach people how to use a charting system, and so on and so forth. And ideally, right, because these types of modules, there's rapid feedback where you click on what in this kitchen is a potential fire hazard. You click on it and it says correct, or it says no, try again, this is far enough away, or it's not far enough away. So you can get rapid feedback, and again, the learner can then make new decisions or continue on or decide if they've actually mastered the required material. The other option for some asynchronous learning is just in time. And so the text talks about standalone computer kiosks with a touchscreen approach. So in essence, if someone's not there, the patient can actually get educational material from this kiosk. Now I can tell you what they actually do at Advent Health is a little bit different, which is the TVs will actually have trainings on them. And so again, it's asynchronous, which is you go to a specific channel and then you can watch the information that you need. So for example, when my wife had our children, they have a video that they have you watch for postpartum care, things to be aware of or monitoring. They have things for blood glucose, they have things for cardiovascular health, and so on and so forth. But again, it's based on as each patient needs it, you can then watch the training modules as needed. Next, the chapter talks about different types of visual media. So you have stationary media, interactive media, technology-focused media, and multiple media. So stationary media, so you'll actually see we have this in the hallway. So this is your classic bulletin or display boards. So again, you'll see we have information on the faculty, we have information on the student organization, we highlight a student, we highlight new faculty members. This can also, though, be things like charts and posters. So again, this might be more relevant if any of you pursue grad school. So there's actually a very specific poster format or a poster presentation where you're actually presenting data. And this can be done either just as a promotional material, which is why you'll usually see them in schools, but they've actually been presented at conferences is what they've actually done with those posters. This can be other things though, like photographs, illustrations, flowcharts. Again, they can show continuum of care, specific activities, events, etc. Or these can be things like print handouts. So looking at interactive media, you're going to, wait for it, interact with it. This is things like whiteboards and flip charts, where again, this may be pre-made, or you may be writing on them as you work with them, or this is things like whiteboards, where again, you write on them, erase, write on them, etc. This can be things like real objects. So you've seen the classic, when you take different beverages, you empty them out, you clean them thoroughly, and then you replace them with granulated sugar so you can then visualize how much sugar is actually in the beverage. This can be pictures or packages. So if you're trying to teach people how to read food labels, or you're trying to look at some restaurant menus, so you get copies of printed menus, so you can then teach people how to look for key phrases, looking for grilled, not fried, you know, if it's served in butter or what kind of sauces, etc. And then the old standby that dietitians have used for decades is food models and measuring cups. And so again, we do have a set on campus if you'd like to look at them, but it's like a molded plastic or silicone food mold that again helps people mostly with portion sizes. So when you say, how big was this portion of meat? And they go, 2 of those, or that size, right? Then we can kind of figure out portion sizes for recalls, meal planning, etc. Looking at technology-focused media, this is things like computer-based presentations. So again, this is your classic projector, PowerPoint, but again, even this technology is starting to evolve. You're starting to see things like infographics and Canva. This is things like audio recording. So again, probably most famously now is things like podcasts, video recordings, and other web-based formats. You'll see that many professional organizations have web-based training that can then be shared. So there may be specific videos from the Academy, from the American Diabetes Association, from the American Heart Association, and growing as an information source is social media. So this is things like Insta, TikTok, etc. And you'd be surprised the amount of educational material that can be made catchy, which again helps with retention, right? Then people are actually engaged with the material. And so looking at multiple media formats, right? It's recommended that you use a combination of media. So for example, for this class, you're required to use a printed handout and a slide presentation. But again, you want to select the media that's best for your goals. So for example, with an elderly population, right, teaching them the information, maybe having hands-on and a handout that they can take home with them with the appropriate font size is a good combination. If I'm working with a high school population and I know that they're going to be interactive and allowed to use their cell phones, then perhaps using assessments like Kahoot is going to be something that's more engaging for them, and I know that they can take full advantage of that technology. So again, you want to make sure you're focusing on the learner's needs and what's going to best suit their needs, not necessarily what's most comfortable or easiest for you. Some other things that we need to consider include numeracy and literacy. So numeracy, so the ability to use numbers and math in ordinary life situations. Literacy is the basic level of reading and writing required to understand basic information. And another concept they actually don't mention in the text, though, is health literacy. So the ability to understand health information, so what that means, how it affects you, right? And so health literacy is actually fairly low in the United States. So again, people actually aren't as familiar with disease processes and what they need to do to treat them as you would expect. So especially working in healthcare, you start to expect people to know a lot more than they actually do about their health. So again, materials need to be understandable for the intended learner. So again, the way I would teach a graduate school class is very different than I would teach elementary school students about food and nutrition. Is very different than how you would teach general population patients about how to take care of themselves, their cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. Now there's several different ways you can assess this. So for example, they talk about SMOG, which is on page 378, but there are other methods to determine literacy. And lastly, deciding if you want to purchase prepared media materials versus preparing your own. And so again, remember, resources are limited. Organizations just don't have unlimited funds. So you want to use the least expensive media to accomplish goals with the best quality. So again, you have to look at the cost of self-made media versus time, quality, and expertise of just purchasing it. So again, do I have the skills necessary? Could I create information on diabetes? Could I create handouts on medications? Or is it more cost effective to just go to the American Diabetes Association and use their materials? Now you need to try and make sure, of course, that you're obtaining proper permission. And so again, it depends on if you have purchased the materials for educational purposes, for distribution purposes, is it limited or unlimited? And again, this is going to be evaluated on a continual basis. So again, at some point, is it no longer worth the cost? Does it maintain it? Again, is the material actually being updated if you're purchasing it? So for example, if you've leased it, which is what a lot of people do, is they'll actually lease something. And as long as you maintain that lease or that relationship with that organization, you're able to use their materials. Now what you're counting on is that they will actually update those materials regularly, saving you that lost time as long as you maintain your lease. But if they're not maintaining the currency and the recentness of that information, it may no longer be worth it, and you would not want to renew that contract with that company, and you may then decide it's now worth it from a financial standpoint and an informational standpoint to prepare your own materials. And so again, this is just going to be determined based on the number of staff, the size of your organization, etc. And so that being said, I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.